The year is 1943. High above the industrial heartland of Nazi Germany, a formation of American B-17 flying fortresses drones through the hostile sky, their mission, to cripple the war machine that has enslaved Europe. But they are flying into a trap. Without warning, Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters tear through the bomber formation like wolves through a flock of sheep. The sky erupts in fire and metal. Within minutes, 11 of the 60 bombers are spiraling toward the earth, their crews dead or scattered to the winds. The survivors press on unprotected, knowing that the worst is yet to come. This was the nightmare that haunted Allied bomber crews as they penetrated deeper into German airspace. For nearly 2 years, they flew into the heart of darkness with no fighter escort, no protection, and little hope of survival. The Luftwaffe ruled the skies, and American airmen were paying the price in blood. But a solution was coming. A fighter so revolutionary, so deadly, that it would turn the tide of the air war and seal the fate of Nazi Germany. This is the story of the P-51 Mustang, the aircraft that transformed from an afterthought into the ultimate predator of the skies. To understand the desperate need for the Mustang, we must first witness the carnage that preceded its arrival. When the combined bomber offensive began in 1942, Allied commanders believed their heavily armed bombers could defend themselves. They were catastrophically wrong. The early missions seemed to validate their confidence. Bombing runs over occupied France and Belgium met little resistance. The Luftwaffe was spread thin, fighting a brutal war on the Eastern Front. German air defenses were primitive, concentrated only around major cities. Allied losses were minimal, and optimism ran high. But as the bombers pushed deeper into the Reich, the situation changed dramatically. Germany's most experienced fighter squadrons were pulled from the Eastern Front and thrown against the Allied formations. The Luftwaffe organized a deadly gauntlet of anti-aircraft guns and fighter interceptors that turned each mission into a potential massacre. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission of August 17, 1943 became a symbol of this new reality. 363 bombers set out to destroy ball-bearing factories deep in Germany. They flew without fighter escort, believing their tight formations and interlocking fields of fire would protect them. They were slaughtered. 60 bombers were shot down. Nearly 1/3 of the attacking force was destroyed in a single day. 600 airmen were killed or captured. The skies over Germany had become a killing field, and the Luftwaffe held dominion over all who dared to enter. The problem was simple but seemingly insurmountable. No Allied fighter possessed the range to escort bombers from England to the industrial targets in Germany and back. The P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt were formidable fighters, but they could only accompany the bombers partway before fuel limitations forced them to turn back. This left the bombers naked and vulnerable in the most dangerous part of their journey, over the heart of Nazi Germany, where the Luftwaffe's deadliest interceptors waited in ambush. The solution to this crisis began not with grand military strategy, but with a simple business proposition. In 1940, the British Royal Air Force approached North American Aviation with a request to manufacture P-40 Warhawks under license. The company's response would change the course of the war. "We can do better," said North American's chief engineer Edgar Schemuth. "Give us 117 days, and we'll build you a fighter that will make the Warhawk obsolete." It was an audacious claim, but Schemuth and his team delivered, working around the clock. They created an aircraft that combined the best of American engineering with British innovation. The prototype flew on October 26, 1940, just 102 days after the contract was signed. They called it the Mustang. The early Mustang was impressive but flawed. Powered by an American Allison engine, it excelled at low-altitude missions, reconnaissance, ground attack, and intercepting German V-1 flying bombs. But at high altitude, where the bombers flew and the real air war was fought, it struggled. Then the British had an inspiration that would transform aviation history. They took the Mustang's sleek airframe and married it to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant that had carried the Spitfire to victory in the Battle of Britain. The result was nothing short of revolutionary. The Merlin engine transformed the Mustang from a capable fighter into an apex predator. It was now faster than the legendary Spitfire, with a superior climb rate and devastating performance at high altitude. Most importantly, it possessed something no Allied fighter had ever achieved: the range to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The United States immediately ordered thousands of these new variants. The P-51D, with its distinctive bubble canopy and 650 caliber machine guns, would become the most feared fighter in the European theater. By mid-1944, the P-51D Mustang arrived in Europe in force. German fighter pilots, who had grown accustomed to easy victories against unescorted bombers, were about to face their worst nightmare. The Mustang's secret weapon was its revolutionary fuel system. External fuel tanks doubled its range, allowing it to fly over 1,000 miles. Farther than any fighter in the world, the fuel system was carefully engineered so the Mustang burned fuel from the external tanks first, maintaining perfect balance. In combat, these tanks could be jettisoned instantly, restoring the aircraft's speed and maneuverability. But it was the bubble canopy that gave Mustang pilots their deadliest advantage. Unlike earlier fighters with limited visibility, the P-51D offered an unobstructed 360-degree view. German fighters could no longer approach unseen. The hunter had become the hunted. The impact was immediate and devastating. German pilots, accustomed to years of air superiority, found themselves outclassed in every measure of combat performance. The Messerschmitt Bf 110, once a feared destroyer of Allied bombers, was so vulnerable to Mustang attacks that it had to be withdrawn from combat entirely. The Luftwaffe's response was desperate. They up-armed their most modern fighters with 20 and 30mm cannons, hoping to destroy bombers before the Mustangs could intervene. But the added weight made these fighters slower and even more vulnerable in dogfights. German ace pilots who had survived years of combat on the Eastern Front were being shot down by American pilots with only months of training. The psychological impact was crushing. A saying spread through the Luftwaffe: if you see a white plane, it is American. If you see a black plane, it is British. If you see no planes at all, that is the Luftwaffe. The Mustang's dominance fundamentally changed Allied fighter tactics. No longer were they restricted to close bomber escort. Now they could range ahead of the formations, hunting German interceptors before they could organize attacks. This aggressive new strategy, called fighter sweep, transformed the air war. Mustang pilots were encouraged to hunt the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found, in the air or on the ground. They would roar ahead of bomber formations, clearing the skies of enemy fighters and destroying aircraft on their airfields. The results were devastating for Germany. Experienced pilots, irreplaceable after years of combat, were being lost faster than they could be replaced. Training programs were shortened, sending inexperienced boys into combat against battle, hardened Americans flying superior aircraft. But the war in the air was not without its moral complexities. Major Richard Peterson's story illustrates the brutal nature of aerial combat. While escorting B-17 bombers deep into German territory, Peterson witnessed something that violated every code of aerial warfare. A German fighter was systematically shooting Allied airmen as they hung helplessly in their parachutes, a cowardly act that violated the unwritten rules of combat. Peterson was furious. He attacked the German fighter not to destroy it, but to damage it enough to force the pilot to bail out. When the German pilot found himself hanging in a parachute, Peterson's Mustang turned back toward him. The American pilot opened fire with his 650 caliber machine guns, nearly emptying his ammunition. The same German who had murdered helpless Allied airmen was now experiencing the same fate. Such was the ruthless efficiency of the P-51 Mustang and the men who flew it. They had become the avenging angels of the Allied air forces, striking fear into the hearts of German pilots who had once ruled the skies. As the war entered its final phase, Germany unleashed its last desperate weapons against the Allied air armada. The Messerschmitt 163 Comet, a rocket-powered interceptor, could climb to 30,000 feet in under 3 minutes, but it was the Messerschmitt 262, the world's first operational jet fighter, that posed the greatest threat. The Me-262 was a quantum leap in aviation technology, far faster than any propeller-driven aircraft. It was armed with 4 cannons and up to 24 rockets. In direct combat, the Mustang stood no chance against this revolutionary fighter, but the P-51 pilots adapted with deadly efficiency. If they couldn't defeat the jets in the air, they would destroy them on the ground. Mustang formations began targeting German airfields with unprecedented aggression, catching the jets before they could take off. The jet fighters arrived too late and in too few numbers to change the outcome of the war. By 1945, the Luftwaffe had been effectively destroyed. German pilots who encountered Mustangs in the air spoke of them with fearful respect, calling them the long-nosed devils and the aircraft that stole the sky. With Europe liberated, the Mustang's war was far from over. In the Pacific theater, P-51D fighters were deployed to escort B-29 superfortresses on their devastating bombing missions over Japan. Here they faced the legendary Mitsubishi Zero, a fighter that had dominated Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor. But by 1945, the Zero was obsolete, a relic of an earlier era facing a technologically superior opponent. The few remaining Japanese pilots, many of them inexperienced teenagers, were no match for the battle-hardened American pilots flying the world's most advanced fighter. The Mustang's dominance was so complete that Japanese aircraft rarely challenged Allied bombers in the war's final months. When the guns fell silent in August 1945, the P-51 Mustang had fundamentally altered the nature of air warfare. It had achieved what no other fighter could: complete air superiority over Nazi Germany. The statistics tell only part of the story. Mustang pilots destroyed over 4,700 German aircraft in the air and an additional 4,131 on the ground. They had escorted thousands of bombers deep into enemy territory, allowing daylight precision bombing that crippled German industry and hastened the end of the war. But the true measure of the Mustang's impact cannot be found in numbers alone. It was the psychological effect, the crushing of German morale and the restoration of Allied confidence. For the first time since the war began, American bombers could penetrate to the heart of Nazi Germany with reasonable expectation of survival. The era of piston-engine fighters ended with the war, replaced by jets that would define the next generation of aerial combat. But the P-51 Mustang had achieved something timeless. It had become the perfect synthesis of engineering brilliance and tactical innovation. Those who flew it called it the Cadillac of the sky. German pilots who faced it had a different name, Der Himmelsträger, the Sky Hunter. Both were correct. The P-51 Mustang was more than just an aircraft. It was the weapon that broke the back of the Luftwaffe and gave the Allies dominion over the skies of Europe. In the annals of military aviation, few aircraft have had such a decisive impact on the outcome of a war. When the history of World War II is written, the P-51 Mustang will be remembered not just as a technical marvel, but as the aircraft that helped deliver freedom to a continent enslaved by tyranny. It was, quite simply, the fighter that changed the world. The Sky Hunters had completed their mission, the wolves of the air had been vanquished, and the skies belonged to the free. Today, fewer than 200 P-51 Mustangs remain airworthy. These flying artifacts serve as living memorials to the courage of the pilots who flew them and the engineers who created them. When you hear the distinctive roar of a Merlin engine overhead, remember, you are witnessing the sound of freedom itself.